Chris Farfoy, 5 minutes.
Mr Speaker, thank you very much. We quite often say it's a pleasure to take calls in this House on pieces of legislation, but it's not in this case because I think anyone who's spoken on this bill would prefer they didn't have to. But it's a necessary piece of legislation given the kind of times we live in, given the access to content that we have now by people of all motivations. As the previous speaker has said, this piece of legislation has wide support from around the House. Up until recently I thought it had unanimous support from around the House. But I do give, obviously, New Zealand First have the right to have their objection to the bill, and they'll have the next committee stage to be able to make any amendments that they see fit. Mr Speaker, can I deal with some of the practicalities of this bill before I talk at another level, which I think because I think we're seeing piecemeal legislation come from the government in terms of dealing with online content, how we police it, how we monitor it, and how we control it, because the technological changes, Mr Speaker, are happening at such a fast rate. But it's quite clear that our legislation at the moment is not fit for purpose, and I'll come back to that in my very short contribution. The increases of sentencing, Mr Speaker, for the possession, importing and exporting, supply and distribution of objectionable material from 10 to 14 years is something we obviously have supported, and I do note there was some objection to at the Select Committee for the assumption of imprisonment for second and third offences from both the from the Law Society and the LAC. Despite their reservations, and I think we may have had some sympathy with some but not all of their submission, we will continue to support this legislation because of the nature of some of the material that we are talking about here, and because of the offending second or third, that might need, the judges will have the discretion as to whether or not they use their discretion to put people away behind bars. Mr Speaker, there's also, I think Alfred Naro referred to clause 5, and I guess this is a classic clause as to where the material facts may have been different for someone if they actually had possession of whether you had a tape or VHS in the old days or a DVD these days, and someone had possession and viewed the material, whereas someone online would have viewed it but not had possession. They've essentially committed the same crime. They've viewed and have possession of the content, but under the old law, Mr Speaker, the person who had simply watched it online, didn't download it or copy it, wouldn't have been held accountable for an offence. So I think clause 5 makes sure we are moving with the times, and then if you intentionally watch some content that you shouldn't be online, under this law you're captured and you commit the offence. I also acknowledge the submission of Vodafone New Zealand because they were concerned that because the bill in its primary form said that if you were in possession of the material you would be committing an offence. I spent about 2 or 3 days with them, and basically, I'm not a techie, but if someone searches something on the internet and that content is overseas, that Vodafone, if it's searched on their network, they hold that content here in New Zealand. So then they don't have to save the money. They save the money from getting the content from overseas. So technically, if someone on that network had searched for the objectionable material, they would hold it inside their servers here in New Zealand, and that would have technically made mean they were contravening the law as it stood. And I think it's wise and clever that we've made some amendment to the bill to make sure the likes of Vodafone, Spark, or any other internet service provider isn't found guilty of possessing this material. If someone on their network is going out and getting it, it's the person who's actually possessing it or downloaded it or viewed it are the ones that are going to be held accountable. This is necessary legislation, but I think the government needs to think in broader terms about how it deals with the deluge of content that New Zealanders are soon going to get their hands on when this ultra-fast broadband system comes online. Basically, households around New Zealand are going to get their hands on much more content, and we need to make sure that there are penalties for people that are uniform right across the spectrum for any offences that they commit. And so far we've got this piecemeal approach which I don't think has been working, which I think is something that New Zealand First has brought up.